My husband got a bit drunk and that's when I had my first slap. I think you're a fully grown adult, this is a baby. The baby comes first.
If I go just a step back,
Yeah.
before marriage,
Yeah.
what were you like? What was life like growing up?
I really valued that once I realised that I had to leave my husband.
How were the first few days after marriage?
It was scary, a bit weird. I think when you get married, you feel like there's all sorts of expectations around how you need to behave and how you conduct yourself.
What had happened? Because you also said you kind of thought, oh, maybe it was my fault.
He had apologised, said it wouldn't happen again, so I had no reason to believe it. The reason why I wouldn't have told anyone is because I was scared that I would be told off that it was your fault, you deserved it.
What were your in-laws with you?
Men need to have control of
The power.
their women. My milk wasn't coming as quickly as it should be.
Yeah.
So obviously I got the blame for making my son ill. And I remember I wanted to breastfeed. I wasn't allowed to. We got home and all my breast milk was thrown into the bin. If my marriage fell, then I was a failure as well.
Yeah.
My sex life came into question. When my dad found out that my husband was being violent towards me, my dad had said then, just leave him.
You know, the solicitor you found, was that through your relative?
I don't have a problem with my son seeing his dad, but these are the concerns I have.
Were you ever in love with your ex? Welcome to Unbroken, my story with Tisha. This is where we talk about failures, challenges, and the lessons that shape us. We explore resilience, inner strength, and growth. Today's guest is a resilient professional and mom of two who embodies strength through every chapter of life. Please welcome Aman. Aman, welcome, and thank you so much for sharing your story with all of us today.
Thank you, Tisha. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I know that you went through a difficult marriage. Do you think you could talk to us about it? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, just some background. I got married in 2001, so quite some time ago now. But back then, arranged marriages and things were the norm. You know, introduced to an individual through mutual friends, got on okay, met each other a few times and decided to get married. Got married, everything seemed fine until I think the first thing that happened was my husband got a bit drunk and that's when I had my first slap, which I didn't tell anyone about. And I'd say that was probably about 3-4 months after my marriage. Thought nothing of it. You know, I was quite young when I got married. I was 21, 22. I hadn't really experienced life as much. So I'd say I probably had quite a shielded childhood as well. You know, very, you know, typically protective parents, you know, want to shield you from everything. And perhaps that wasn't the right thing to do at the time. But, you know, every parent does what they think is the right thing to do for their child. So I don't begrudge any of that. Yeah, so that happened. I think immediately, because I was quite young and naive, thought I probably deserved it, if I'm honest with you. And then, you know, things were okay. But then occasionally things would happen. Like I wasn't allowed to express my opinion, especially if it didn't agree with my husband. Questions were raised around closeness to my cousins. But we're a very close family, you know, we hug, we kiss, you know, we're very, very close. But, you know, all sorts of, it was the first time that questions like that were raised, which made me feel a bit uncomfortable because we're like, you know, this is just my family. We just love each other. Yeah. And then I think I'd say things got worse when I became pregnant. I think my in-laws were quite traditional in that they wanted me to have a son. I didn't really care whether I had a son or a daughter. My parents didn't really care. My dad's got 3 girls, so, you know, values daughters. You know, I've got an uncle that's got 4 daughters, and I don't think they'd change that for anything in the world. But I did decide to find out what I was having more because I'm a kind of person that likes to plan and I don't like the unknown, so it was more for that. And I found out I was having a son. But when my husband told my in-laws, he lied to them and said we were having a daughter. They were all a bit sad, and then he said no, we're having a son, and everyone was really happy. And that kind of really hurt me, if I'm honest with you, because I was like, this is my child.
Yeah.
Actually, all I want is my child to be healthy. I think when I got married, I think my in-laws were very much, our son's married to an educated woman, she's doing really well at work, but I was still expected to assume a traditional Indian housewife role in the house, which I didn't have a problem with, but started to notice differences when their daughters were treated differently and I was treated differently. And I think that's when I started to feel quite down about things. But when I got pregnant, I was quite ill, had really bad morning sickness, really struggled. I wasn't allowed to rest. I had to go and cook, regardless of how many times it made me vomit and stuff like that. So I just think there was just that lack of compassion or understanding. And then when I had my son, things got worse because my son was my number one priority. And that didn't sit well with my husband. It was always like, no, I come first. And my argument would be, you're a fully grown adult. This is a baby. The baby comes first. And that's when I started to see more of the increase in the physical violence, if you like, and more of the mental kind of violence as well. So yeah.
If I go just a step back,
Yeah.
before marriage,
Yeah.
what were you like? What was life like growing up? I know you said you had a very protective upbringing, but what did that look like and translate to in a day-to-day
I think, whilst my parents were quite protective, my dad had a difficult childhood. He'd grown up in poverty. His dad was in the army, he travelled a lot. So that, so when he came to England, he just wanted the best for his family here, but he was still supporting his family back home. So, we had a lot of interaction with our grandparents. Family was a big part of my growing up. So, every weekend you'd either have someone over or you'd be over with your aunts and uncles. So it was, I think it was a very happy childhood. And, food was a big thing.
Yeah.
Everyone enjoyed their food. They cooked their food. But I would say it was still very patriarchal in that the women did the cooking, the men sat and relaxed. And I think myself and my cousins grew up with yes, you can be educated, but you need to know how to cook, you need to know how to clean, you need to know how to, all those expectations of a good Indian wife, a good Indian daughter-in-law. So I think that was a big part of our upbringing as well.
Yeah. Were you able to express yourself quite freely with your parents and your wider family?
Yeah, I think we were allowed to have opinions. We were allowed to have conversations. My dad used to work quite a lot. He'd have the odd weekend off. And we used to spend that weekend having conversations, so we'd talk about anything and everything. And we were allowed to have opinions, whether we agreed with each other or not, that was always a bone of contention, which I think is healthy. But we weren't stifled in that way, no.
Yeah. But for your parents, they had 3 daughters, and they tried to do the best they could in terms of upbringing, and giving the experiences and education and all of that.
Yeah.
But obviously preparing you for what they thought was the right thing to do is learning how to do all the household, everything, and cleaning.
Yeah. And that's how he tried to bring us up. But I think one thing I have to say is he was very adamant that we get an education and whilst it wasn't apparent at the time, he said, you need to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. I don't want you to be dependent on anyone. And I didn't really appreciate that until after I went through my experience, really, how important that was. At that point in time as teenagers, you're just like, I really valued that once I realised that I had to leave my husband, if you like. So yeah.